Welcome to the Hidden Potential Podcast. I'm your host, Homer Hargrove, and today we have a special guest where we're going to have a conversation with Pastor Mario Nava. Pastor Mario is married to his beautiful bride, Irma. He's a father to Rebekah and Andrew, and he is the pastor leading at Living Faith Church here in San Antonio, Texas. And this church is an outreach-minded, be the church kind of church, and his messages are inspiring, they're uplifting, yet he also challenges and provokes people's thoughts within his message. The word of God is brought out each week through this ministry in an easy to understand way, without ever compromising biblical principles, which is saying a lot nowadays. Pastor Mario, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Pastor Homer. I'm honored that you'd have me, and just blessed to serve along you and the city here at San Antonio. So I'm glad I'm on your program.
Great. I'm glad to have you. When we first met, I remember you told me that I made a comment years ago about how I'm really funny, and I feel like every time I'm usually with you, it's more of a serious tone. So hopefully I get to prove that I actually am funny, that I do have a humor bone. So, but let's go ahead and get started. And can you just share a little bit about kind of like your passion and what you do and why you do it?
I think like every guy that plants a church, and mine was many years ago now in 1998, but and it didn't seem like that long ago, but time has a way of doing that. You always want to say, "Hey, I'm going to do church different," and and you know, you try, I guess, but when you look back on it, the introspective thing is to say, hey, we're kind of doing that the same way everyone else is, but um, there is a uniqueness. I guess the passion that I've known about is that Jesus isn't somebody that would just stay in a church. Um, According to the Gospels, he was very outreach minded. Thank God for his example of going to the synagogue that I see. He even did miracles there. But the majority of his time that's recorded in the Gospels with his disciples that they wrote about, the first 10 accounts, he was feeding people, he was healing people, um, he was dialoguing outside. Well, they called him, a friend of sinners, which, was, of course, not a good thing to say back then, but it turned into a blessed thing for us to have here, that he's a friend to people like me and my neighbors and people that don't go to church. And so the passion that I have has always been, since we planted the church, and even when I was a youth pastor, was let's get outside the four walls and really become the church, and that sort of thing. Sometimes we see those signs on the driveway or in the exit signs of churches say you're now entering the mission field. I've seen those at some of the churches, but that's really true. You're entering a mission field, but the church is really happening on the outside of your church and my church, Pastor Homer. So, yep.
That's such a powerful thing to say, because I think that especially for a lot of young leaders, they envision that ministry for them starts the miraculous day that maybe they get hired at a church, or maybe they get some type of position at a church. And I feel like even for me early on in leadership, there's this ideology that hopefully one day I can really start doing ministry if the church would just let me. And what you're talking about, it's like you don't have to ask permission to do good. And this idea that so much ministry happens outside of the church, and that here we are as pastors saying, oh man, if only we could do more ministry outside of the church. Well, ministry in the church is our job, and we see this idea that real powerful ministry happens outside of the walls of the very church we're leading. I think that's so powerful. In this process, one thing that you also said is how at the beginning you had this mind that you're going to be different than every other church. And I feel like that's like the line of thinking that all of us have when we kind of first get our stick of responsibility, and that we want to make it special. And I think that there's a mixture of our ego in there, but also there our desire to do something exponential with what God has given us. We want to be good stewards. And I think that one or two things happen. People either get deflated and feel like what they're doing isn't working, or they almost have like this me against the world mentality. And I feel like neither one of those things are you, in how you literally help lead a pastors network that supports other pastors, and you're all about connection, and you have such a genuine heart. So how do you avoid these pitfalls of either developing an ego, or developing a sense of me against the world mentality?
It's a great question, man. You I, I haven't been able to, honestly. I'm being real, maybe a little bit transparent here, but you do get those points. But I think it's your walk with God, and I think Jesus gave us those examples again, and the Bible, of men that got a little bit too much of themselves, or thought too much of themselves and what they could do, and then they fell, but Jesus reinstates them. Peter's a good example, of course, over and over, how he got. And even the sons of thunder, they were, mom tried to promote them to be the vice presidents of Jesus' administration, right? Um, so they were, but the outcome was, God used them. There was probably a breaking process. Uh, so I think it's just walking, and then realizing, today am I full of pride, and through the lens of God's word, and through the presence of God. I remember one of our pastor groups, Homer, I think it was just last week, you said something, I worship, before I prepare on Sunday. And man, when you worship God, or a song of faith touches you, man, you realize, God, I'm really not worthy to do any of this, but you've allowed me to. And so the presence of God, I think, is the remedy, to from rising from that, so to speak, if I can even say that, to minister and to
Right.
God's people. And yeah, so I think it's when men, I know it's this way because they write books about it after they fail. The majority of them, they thought it was, again, there was no repentance in their life. There was no sorrow for sin. There was no fear of God. That's probably the best way to put it. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, let's fear God. Not that he's scary, of course, y'all know that, but that he's with us, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, yes, sir.
I hear the essence of, like, really to combat this superiority mindset is
Yeah,
really humility, and that humility is found in the presence of God. And I think that what's interesting about that is that so many people, seasoned leaders and young leaders, I think that we hear that a lot, right? Like, prayer and worship helps humble our hearts. But I think that it's almost like we don't fully grasp it. We hear prayer and, like, yeah, I got that. Let's move on though. Tell me how to be the best leader ever. And like,
hmm,
yeah, I need humility. Now tell me how to rise to the top. And
yeah,
we don't really fully appreciate how serious and how
mhm,
much longevity that comes from a humble heart and pursuing God in ministry. And that even goes into the note of how surprised I was of how easy it is to start neglecting your own
yeah,
personal devotion as a minister of God. And there were certain times in my life, in my ministry, to where I felt like I was having more devotion time before I ever became a minister. It's like you get so um,
yeah,
easily overwhelmed and so easily busy, to where you start only having devotion time because you're desperate for God to give you a message. You just don't know
yeah,
what to talk
right,
about. Like, all right, maybe I just should pray now. Maybe I'll finally pray because I don't know what to talk about. And I think that the essence of what you're saying is being in a state of humility kind of requires us to be in a state of God's presence, and how that really just makes things simple for us. It makes it's simple for us to have a ministry that lasts, rather than one that rises and falls quickly, which I see a lot. There's a lot of young leaders that they start out and make it maybe 2 years, and then they become a real estate agent. They just they just
Yeah.
ready to bail out, and it's just not what they expected. It was harder, and God called me somewhere else. And I think that there's a lot of young leaders that don't have to fall to the wayside if they were to better fully appreciate the power of prayer, devotion, and really just what it is to be a minister. That's not about being different than everybody else, but just really looking at, who has God called you to be? Are you really called to, you're not necessarily called to stand out, you're called to just reach people. And that's something really unique. And I love that. In your process of being a pastor, could you kind of share a little bit of a story of what that was like in the maybe in the early stages of your leadership? What was that transition like for when you first realized that God has been calling you to a leader as a minister, and what that stage was like for you?
Went to Christ for the Nations, which is a great school. It's in Dallas, Texas. Guys, probably many have heard about it. Before that, as a teenager, I wanted to be in ministry. I was kind of this nerd,
The
or this
glasses gave it
backward.
away.
Yeah, that even you know what I started wearing glasses like in my 40s. So get ready, man. No, you probably have, I think I inherited that from my dad, whatever. But anyway, I started wearing glasses in my 40s. But yeah, I was this kind of backwards kid, overweight when I was a teenager, and it really kind of would. I think one of those kids you talked about, not standing out in high school, just just that. And I was a Christian too, but just shy, and uh uh, but when I went to church, which uh was my, like, my club, my, instead of being part of the football team or whatever, that's what I did. I went to church. And that's also probably some things, your podcast is called, Hidden Potential. um just I think that was a place for me to hide, where I was accepted. And and it, we really didn't have a youth pastor back then in that church I was in. um but I had a relationship with a pastor, and he kind of, without knowing it, discipled me. uh I think I how did it look like was, just saying, man, I really want to do what my pastor does. And if I could do that the rest of my life, um, it would be the greatest honor of my life. And so that began the journey. And, of course, they tell you need to go to Bible college, which I think I have what I have, because that was part of my journey. I know guys that haven't gone, and they're doing even better than I have or will ever have. But uh, I think it looked like, you asked how it looked like, was just um God, I really don't know what you're going to do next, but if you help me, I'll do it. So I would have loved to stay a youth pastor, um, probably because I had so much fun at it. There was problems, of course, like there is with ministry, uh, but I love having fun still, um, and having joy in that. So it's so I don't really see myself my age, I guess. Other people do, I guess, the way they, but but I don't know if that answered the question a little bit, or maybe I led
Yeah.
a little bit more. Yeah,
No, that was great. And I love how you described a little bit about like kind of like your adolescence, in the sense that um
yeah,
you didn't seem like one of the cool kids per se, and here you are now years later to where you are a leader in your church, you're pastoring people look to you for guidance and support and to hear God's word. And I think that, just like you said, like not realizing the hidden potential within you, I think that as a lot of there's two sides of that. There's a lot of leaders who don't realize how much they could really make an impact. They disqualify themselves because of, you know, this, that, and the other. And then the other side of it is that there's a lot of young leaders who kind of like cherry pick people that they're willing to disciple. And
Mm,
especially a lot of youth ministers, a lot of youth pastors that end up trying to only disciple the cool kids. And it's don't get me wrong, cool kids, you know, seem,
mm,
you know, quote unquote cool kids. They need, you know, just as much love, support, and oftentimes there's the reason that they have such a more social uh personable traits is sometimes because they've had to, because their home life is so neglectful that they had to stand out and they had to learn that early. But I think that there's so many seemingly ordinary kids that get looked over that would be amazing leaders. They would be so receptive to what you would pour into them. But so many leaders are looking for that influential kid, the one that would, they think would bring a bunch of other kids. And to know that there's some times where you just need you're planting a seed to grow in the long run. You're, you know,
yeah.
if I were to one thing that's been on my heart lately is like the thought of, you know, the end times. It's like every day seems like it's closer, where like, God, just in case, like, please like, turn the bus around for me if you forget me. But it's like I have more and more on my thought that, God, I want to see the people in my church in heaven. I want to see the people that I minister to in heaven. And to
Yeah.
where it's not just like, oh, I want to grow, you know, like, oh, they gave their life to Christ. Like, I'm have this genuine realization
Mhm.
that people will be in heaven with me, that I like, if I am a proper minister, you know, if I do the work I'm supposed to do, and this heart cry that I want to see these people saved in heaven with me. And to know that, like, when you're a minister and you're planting these seeds, to think along that mindset, am I just in a sense like looking for short-term results, to where uh we created a fun atmosphere and it was like, I could say that it was a successful event, but am I bringing anyone closer to heaven with me? You know, that's a powerful thing. And I think that you are a perfect example of someone that was discipled and poured into in a way that may have seemed like, you know, is just like, oh, well, you know, I feel bad for this kid. But, you know, God knows that those little seeds were planted in such good soil to where you're this pastor yourself, that it was good, good fruitfulness. So I think that's really powerful. Today's episode is brought to you by Gravetop Designs online store. Visit gravetopdesigns.com/shop to find custom-made Christian clothing that's edgy and actually looks good. I crafted all of the designs myself, so I'd love to hear your feedback and tell me what you think. Share your next purchase on Instagram and tag Gravetop Designs for a chance to get 10% off your next order. Shop today, help support this channel. Again, that's gravetopdesigns.com/shop. Now that you've been in ministry for it seems like the majority of your life, what would you say has been one of your greatest obstacles when it comes to ministry?
That's easy. Myself, just get in the way of yourself. Just your um, the inner battles that we have. Again, hidden things, but they're potentials that you struggle with, and just your self-esteem. It can take a beating in anything you do, being a plumber, electrician. But as a pastor, you rely on because you communicate and people communicate back with you. You can get beat up, and then it affects everything. Thank God for my wife's not perfect, but she almost is. And just that a home will help. heal you, and of course the presence of God. But but thank God, I just think, yourself, we the obstacles of just getting over, um, uh, not being sure of yourself at times, and checking yourself, or God, can I really do this? Or um, again, it is faith, and you go into the unknown at times with challenges, and God, you need to help me. And when you look back on it, because obstacles are faced and they're always present, if you're doing ministry and you're doing something worthwhile, you're going to have to look back at God's faithfulness. Like, God, you helped me in the past, and you'll help me now. Yeah. So,
It's so powerful. And, I feel like I think that every person I've had on this show has described this type of imposter syndrome, this insecurity. And to know that like we all got it, but we all feel like we're the only ones, that we're the only ones, that are secretly incapable of doing what we're doing. And to know that this is this consistent fear within our nature, and that yet despite our fears God has called us, and that for you to say that after all this time your greatest obstacle is really overcoming yourself and overcoming that those doubts and those fears, those things that you feel like hold you back, and to know that here you are now still standing, and that all the while your biggest enemy can be yourself sometimes. I think that's a really, really great thing for people to identify within themselves. And I think that even that tone of imposter syndrome, I feel like it often comes when we are trying to do something greater than that than normal. We're trying to break out of that mediocrity. And whenever if you don't ever feel imposter syndrome, perhaps it's because you're not reaching far enough. You're in a place where you're too comfortable. I remember there's a time where I had like self-reflection, and I realized that when I was grinding on the streets, being a pastor and driving for Uber and Lyft, there'd be times where I felt more comfortable in the car with a bunch of drunk people than I did at a table with a bunch of pastors. And
yeah.
I reflected on that. Why is it that I feel more comfortable? Why do I feel uneasy around pastors? And it wasn't because the pastors were judgmental or mean or anything like that. I realized that it was because when I was sitting with a group of pastors and being the youngest one there, that I felt that insecurity, that imposter syndrome, that I was doing something greater than what I felt like I was qualified for it. But when I was in a car full of some people I just picked up from the bar, I was like, well, I seem pretty level-headed here.
Yeah.
I seem like I got it together. I think that it really shows that when we are not in those uncomfortable spaces, that it's perhaps because we're afraid of what growth looks like, that we're afraid that we can't, that we don't have it in us to grow, and it's simply not true. It's that stretching process.
Yeah.
So going from there, I asked you about what your greatest obstacle has been. What would you say is something that you're most proud of?
You spoke just a moment ago about grinding, and there were those years where I was bivocational. The church, of course, grew, but there was a point where I was, you know, um, trying to feed two children, and then make payments on our home and that sort of thing. And so, um, yeah, so I think when just that accomplishment of being bivocational, and and working, I do think it did. I look back and I go, man, did that cause some damage on me now, in the sense of uh, my physical health? Um, and there's some things I think you pay for in ministry, because um, if you want to do it so bad, you kind of stay afloat on the water by dog paddling as much as you can, and and I know those moments, and kind of, I guess that's what I'm. If I'm gonna boast, like, it's, man, I made it in that sense. Now, is there still survival time that keeps you hungry and keeps you, like, I guess, training, if that's the right way, in a way, spiritually, and staying hungry? Yeah. And I think if that ever went away, like, I made it and arrived, and you don't stay hungry, then you really, you're very easy to get picked off, um, and you could be a casualty pretty quick. So, yeah, I think the aspect of just staying hungry, and accomplishing things, uh, that you do when you're burning at both ends. Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember. One last thing, on that. I remember that for a few Saturday nights, because I worked all week and didn't really have time to prepare for Sunday mornings, and it wasn't all the time, but to carve out some time to prepare, I remember staying up all night on Saturday through Sunday morning, and then just going, um, from, my desk to the church. And of course, I was wiped out after church, even as a younger guy. But yeah, there were those moments, and sometimes I need to have compassion, I think, for guys that I see. Well, like, I can't do that, or I'm not, and maybe they're in their 20s, um, but I don't want to also, hey, I did it, you can do it. You can stay up all night, get it done. There's no reason why. And they're volunteering at the church. So that's a heartless person like myself, but just thank God for that.
Yeah, I think that what you're describing is really powerful. And I feel like part of the aspect of how you're saying, of like burning at two ends, being bivocational. I feel like for me, those are the times where I thought about quitting the most, is when I remember talking to a mentor, and him asking how things were going, and just like, well, I feel like if I wasn't worried about money, I'd really enjoy what I was doing. and and I feel like
Yeah,
it's almost like to be most proud of is like, in a sense, being proud that you didn't quit, and
yeah,
in the moments that
good.
you really wanted to. And I think that so many people, especially starting out in ministry, I know I was totally surprised by how hard it was. And in the moments where you feel like, well, I'm like, shouldn't God be providing? Isn't this part of the
Mhm.
deal? And then you hear,
Yeah.
like prosperity gospel messages like, well, if it's God's vision, he'll give the provision. And you're like, well, I guess God didn't call me. It's like, it can feel so confusing, and to kind of throw out all of the noise and realize that it just can be that hard. And that one day, if you don't give up, it'll be the most proudest thing you have, knowing that you didn't quit when times were tough. And it's a lot like a marriage. How funny it is that,
Yeah.
God
Yeah.
consistently relates it to his relationship with us as a marriage and the church. And, there's times in marriage, I've been married now 11 years, which, is a fraction for some people, and a miracle for others. But to know that there's times where, like, I would have never thought at 3 years married that we would ever have a hard time. And now
Right.
at 11 years, I'm like, oh, okay, that you can actually get under each other's skin. And this could actually be hard. And really learning how to commit, even despite it being difficult, committing despite that it's not everything that you thought it was, and that you didn't anticipate certain struggles. And then at the end of it, you're like, wow, I'm so glad that we're still married. I'm so glad I'm still in this. It's the best gift I ever have. Um, I think that's so powerful. And when it comes to, I think that you're right though, when it comes to young leaders, and there being there's I think it's not just our generation or this coming generation when it comes to the hesitancy to hard work. Like millennials, there's some millennials that seem like they're Generation X, to where they work hard, they like over
Mhm.
exasperate themselves, take on too much, they bite on too much. And And then there's some where they're, 35 years old and their mom is still paying their insurance bill. It's like
Yeah.
there's both sides, but to I think that a lot of young leaders need to know that it's going to be hard. And I think that one thing that my heart was like within this podcast is to be kind of like a bridge between starting out and being seasoned. And I
Yeah.
feel like there's a lot of leadership uh lessons and podcasts available for like a seasoned leader who's been in it for several years. And you'll hear things on a seasoned leadership podcast like you have to know when to rest. And being a minister now for 13 years and having 3 kids and being married,
Yeah.
I get it now. I understand that like if I don't rest, it affects my family, it affects my marriage. It's like you just it's different. When I was in my when I was 20 years old though, I didn't really need to rest. It's when I was single, you don't really like that doesn't
Yeah.
it's not as applicable. Even when I was married is like there's some to some extent, but is like you're so even married, you have so much flexibility without kids. It's like I think that a
Mhm.
lot of young aspiring leaders really do need to get the aspect that if you want it to work, it's going to take hard work, and it's not going to just miraculously be successful for you. You're going to have to put in some grit. And I think that I truly think that a lot of leaders, just young leaders, think that it will be easier and that God is just will give them favor and grace. And like, yeah, but it's still going to be really hard. It's still
Yeah. Yeah.
you any success you do have will be a miracle, but give that still, you're still going to have to really work hard at it. So I think
Yeah.
that that's a really powerful aspect that you're sharing that young leaders really need to grasp. Speaking on that, when let's take an idea of a young aspiring leader who's maybe they're just starting out, they're kind of dipping their toes in leadership, and they
Mhm.
have this ambition inside of themselves. What characteristics or skills would you suggest for that kind of person to be able to move ahead?
I I think stay submitted. Try if you can to find a Moses. If you're a Joshua, and I'm using biblical stuff here with the Old Testament. Uh, if you're if you're a John Mark, find a Paul, a Timothy. But and that's hard to do. I'll be honest with you. A wise man told me, an older man, he said, hey, I'm going to go back home. I told him because I was being prepared for ministry, and um, there's no Moses for me, So, and he told me something. He said, well, then you become the Moses, become that man that people can look at. So that was planted in my heart when I was like 21. Um, and I never forgot that. Uh, if it can be perfect, I think young men, I know young men because I desired that. So I wanted a father in the Lord. I know this might open up for some broader things, but try to find that. And then I know guys that go to mega churches because they love maybe the singles group or the young adult group, and there's lots of girls there also, whether it be a smaller church. And I actually, my wife, I found her in a mega church because I went to that big group, the college and career group, uh, and thank God. But I knew I wasn't going to have a relationship with the pastor because he had, 5,000 sheep or whatever, and uh, I got to know him a little bit, but there was never any one-on-one. The first church that I served at, where I got paid as a youth pastor, when I interviewed, he was asking me. He said, "Do you have any questions for me?" And the only thing I asked him was, and he always remembered it because he still told me until the day he went to be with in heaven. He said, I was the only one that asked him out of all the um, potential youth pastors, and I was the one that got hired, thank God. Um, he said, I asked him, would you pray with me on a regular basis? And of course he said yes. What would he said no? And I need to really be real honest. He I don't remember him really praying with me a lot. There were times, but it wasn't like intentional. If I can, so yeah. Uh, I think as a young minister, or to be in ministry, my best advice is find somebody that will, and maybe it won't be a pastor, maybe it will be a deacon, an elder, your small group leader, that sort of thing. But um, and get humble enough that you don't know it all, so you can receive from that person. You'll be surprised who mentors you in life after you've lived almost 60 years. Well, that guy that was a backward guy, but maybe he had a great work ethic, and he still loved God. He poured into your life. Um, so that it's surprising to think back on your life on how many people have loved you, and been an example on even, hey, this is how you should really dress. This is how, little things, present yourself as a man, um, besides your own earthly father. But ministry is something a little bit different if your father was never in ministry. That's another
Yeah.
issue. But I hope that answered that one, man. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
that's great. And I think that finding a mentor is pivotal in someone's growth within leadership. And
Yeah.
especially when, I mean, when you realize that you just don't know what you don't know, and
Mm.
that it's like a combination of things. It's being able to avoid certain pitfalls. It's also able to lean on somebody when times are tough. It's so much easier to go through a struggle when you have someone that you're able to go to. I mean, even like just talking about the problems that you're facing in ministry and have somebody to where you're talking to someone and they actually understand what you're going through.
Yeah.
It's encouraging. And I think that it's one of the most um under it's just not given enough credit for when it comes to finding a mentor. It really does help. It catapults your growth forward because it's in a sense that they're giving you tips that they had to learn through experience, and they're giving them to you for free. It's not going to cost
Mhm.
you time or your own experience. They're helping you to where everything that you learn after that will be, is an addition to what they try to teach you. Especially it's like if you're running into problems that you don't know how to solve and they've already experienced that problem. It's like having a math tutor and you're trying to work out this equation and they say, oh no, that's not the right way to do it, the answer is
Mhm.
this. And you're like, if you were to say no, 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 I can do it, I'm gonna just do the whole equation myself, and they're like, it's wrong though. You got the wrong
Yeah.
answer, you're doing it the wrong way.
Yeah.
It would be just silly and foolish to try to do it anyway, even though someone is telling you that's the wrong answer. And I think that a lot of times we do that to try to prove ourselves, when there's just a lot of cases where it's like, maybe you should just take the advice. um, and I just really, really appreciate how you said that. Now, when it comes to uh, where you're at now and where you started out at, what would you say is one question that you wished you would have asked earlier?
Um, do you really need a building to do ministry? Mm. Um, and my hope was they would have said you don't. But the sooner that you can get one, uh, it would it would help you. And I probably didn't do it in the right order. Once you can get a base, a hub, however that looks, even if it's uh, uh, it's tough renting schools and auditoriums, like, and you're setting up, because that will wear on anyone. You got to have a massive amount of people. I've known church planners that I really admire because they've taken teams into cities, and the pastor, sends them out. Again, larger churches usually they want to establish, Sunnyside. Baptist church in in Dallas or Austin. And so they
Yeah.
said, man, I'm amazed that I love that example. But um, a lot of those guys too, and you probably know this, Pastor Homer, they don't. You wonder what happened, because they're off the map now. It didn't make it. So I think that would be the one of the things. If you can get somewhere where your stuff is there, you're freed up a lot more to think about it. That's I don't think you see church planners in their 60s, um, because the energy, the physical, um, that it takes to establish that. And then I think I should have asked the questions also. What did Jesus mean by go and making disciples? The sooner that I would have gotten after that, I think the healthier my church would be now and in the years to come. Don't wait to disciple as much as it's hard. Get There are tons of programs out there. Everyone's going to do discipleship differently, I feel, but there should still be the main thing that Jesus said: disciples that make disciples. Get that intentionality out there and try to, at the beginning, let it be inbred within you, so you transpose that onto your church. And it's one of the core things that you do: make disciples that make disciples. We're not doing it anywhere near that Jesus said and what he did, but we're trying. And probably 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it was just something that I wasn't doing as much as they're saying. Well, I get encouraged by people in my church by saying, they say this to me: you weren't intentional by making disciples, but you still did it. Yeah, you do that, but there should be something else, that you're actually meeting with a group of people and their purpose is to be discipled. And again, you're being discipled by Jesus. There's probably always going to be a leader, but um, when they can start reproducing themselves, it's pretty an amazing thing to watch. But that's what I would do.
That's a really powerful testimony too, because I think that especially just starting out, we're more so looking at like the fruit in the sense of what are we going to eat today?
Yeah,
Who can I bring to Christ today? Who can I bring to the service today? And
yeah,
making disciples is beyond just what am I going to eat today and what am I going to plant for later. And it's this idea that you are making disciples is really planting seeds to grow orchards rather than just going out and looking for some fruit to eat today. And
yeah.
it's
Wow.
the idea of longevity for ministry. And I like what you said at the first part of, do you really need a building? And being I mean, I'm in a unique position where I still don't have our own building for our church. We just rent out anybody that lets us, whether it's a bar or a dance studio. We're willing to go anywhere. But even just realizing that you can make ministry as gritty as you need it to be, and that
Yeah.
there's some churches that still meet outside, that like they legit meet outside. And I mean, to me, that's like, well, dang, like they got people going in the heat. They got people
Oh
out there
yeah.
in the elements.
Yeah.
And so
That's
to
right.
know that you can make ministry happen anywhere, that you don't have to limit it to the traditional sense or the idea of, even if it's not in a church. I mean, even just so many, I've heard of a minister that started a Twitch channel for a video gaming streaming
Wow.
channel, and pretty much started a church that way, to where people are literally tuning in just to hear his message and stuff. And he ended up raising money to plant a physical church through his virtual streaming. It's
Wow.
the opportunities are seemingly limitless when you
Yeah.
add the power of God to it. And I think
It's good.
it's a really powerful component for people to take off the limits of what has always been done, or of what you think it has to be, and allow yourself to be flexible especially early on in your leadership, early on in ministry. Allow yourself to be flexible. Don't try to be like the mega church when you got 10 people going to your church. Just allow yourself to be flexible and to be where you're at. I think that's great advice. Let me ask you one final question, and that is, what is the greatest change that you've made as a leader?
I think it it was, I didn't do it. I did it because my marriage grew, and you know, everyone wants to be. No one plans on getting divorced. I've heard that once said, but you know, people do. And so um, I'm celebrating like over 30 years of being married to my bride, um, which is amazing to me. I never thought you just don't think about that, when you're married 2 or 3 years, or um, so the greatest change probably that I saw that was organic was my wife becoming a leader alongside of me. Um, she worked because of, we had to we both work like many couples do in our culture. So I think the greatest change that has happened is that my wife came alongside of me in her time, in her way, and now she's a great leader with me in my church, and it's really grown our church more. um, you envision sometimes pastors' wives to be this way, or not everyone's going to play the piano or be able to sing, a pastor's wife, the old model or whatever it might be. But um, when your wife can love the church as much as you, and that's because you love her instead of the church more. You heard that thing. The church has become a mistress to many men,
Mm.
um, and so I think loving my wife um, properly, not perfect. I can't write a book on it. Can't do a marriage seminar on it, but that whole change is really been something I'm beholding. Like, man, God, look what you've done through my wife. Look what you're doing through our church because of her leadership. So,
Wow.
yeah.
That's a powerful testimony. And I think that you're right in the sense that a lot of um, I think it's not even always as much of a leader's desire for people to be saved as it is truly one's ambition to grow the church and to
Mhm.
stand out. And I think that we label it as, oh, I'm just care about the loss, but deep down
Mhm.
it's you want that ambitious desire, and there's nothing wrong per se with that desire, but don't discredit the reality. Uh don't falsely live this lie that you're doing it for the church when you're really doing it for yourself, and you're putting your wife on the back burner in the process. And
Yeah.
to realize that here you are 30 years married, and the greatest change in ministry was really the change in how you saw your wife through it. And I think that's a powerful testimony, powerful example. And I think that there's a lot of young leaders that will either pursue one or the other, but they'll either bail on ministry to go pursue their girlfriend, or they'll
Right.
bail on their wife to pursue the ambition in church. And
Yeah.
to realize that if you allow that relationship to be special, to where marriage truly is like you're joining together two lives, what I do you do, and allow it to flourish. I find that same respect that my wife is labeled as co-pastor of the church,
Mhm.
and I've had people leave the church over that. They
Yeah.
said, well,
I understand.
we don't like how she's labeled co-pastor. I said, well, that's never going to change, so you might as well go.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and
Good.
it's so life-giving for that she is not just the pastor's wife, that she's a vital leader within the church, that that many people are able to go to, and she gives a type of
Mm.
compassion that I'm just not able to give. And
That's so
to,
good.
in the same way that we complete ourselves for our children, I'm dad and she's mom. It's I think that there's a unique part of church to where it's able to be like that as well. So
Yeah.
I love how the better you treated your marriage, the better your ministry got. I think that's
Yeah.
super powerful.
Yeah.
As we wrap things up today, Pastor Mario, where could people connect with you? Maybe they even here in San Antonio, or maybe they're listening online and they want to check out your church or connect with you. How can they do that?
Yeah, our website's livingfaithsa.org, Living Faith SA San Antonio, or just livingfaithsa.org. And you can find everything there that you need from hearing us and what we want to, what our vision is, our values, and what we believe. And so, yeah, that's probably the best place. Can I say one more thing
Yeah, of
about
course.
other things? Hey, I just hearing you speak, Pastor Homer. You can edit this out if you want to, but you're such an encourager. It's like within you, and you. Again, I'm blessed, and I do remember the first time I met you. We were at this buffet place. Um, we were talking about Man Up, which is coming up, and that's. But I asked you. I said, you know, you were just talking, and I noticed you right away because you were you had a little like a dry sense of humor, but you were funny, and kind of like the guy in the back of the classroom cutting up that was making everybody laugh. But again, this was probably maybe 5, 8 years ago. I don't know how long ago, but you mentioned which I still remember that you wanted to be like a you thought about being a stand-up comic. Now, if I'm getting this wrong, but when you told your wife that, hey, I'm thinking about becoming a stand-up comic, she actually said, without missing a beat or without laughing, said, "Are you're still going to keep your regular job, though, aren't you?" And I just thought that was so good. And then I love the uniqueness of your church name. I know that there's a story behind it, but Grave Top, and so I'm just blessed that we sit at the same table almost at a weekly basis, and we're learning at the feet of Jesus, so to speak. And so I'm grateful for your leadership, also, sir.
Well, that means so much, Pastor Mario. I really appreciate you saying all that. And no, I'm not going to cut out. People should hear that, right? And I
You are.
really do appreciate you, and thank you for being on our show today. All that being said, those y'all listening, could y'all do me a favor? Could y'all leave a rating and review for this podcast? It'd help me out and help others be able to see the show. And until next time, have a great life.